sort of
So what did you
genre.
use then in this new one that you were drawing on what we would regard as particularly traditional aspects of writing for string quartet?
Yeah. Okay, I think there are specifically some references to the structural elements or ideas of the formal elements from the 18th and 19th century that find their way into this piece, although in a kind of reinvented form. For example, in the third movement, there is a set of variations. The fourth movement is called a scherzo. There are elements of it which are light-hearted. The second movement is kind of like a very condensed sonata form, and there's also a prelude at the beginning, such as Haydn might use in a slow prelude before leading into his sonata form movement. So there are these elements which draw back on the tradition, but they are knitted together in a kind of continuous fabric. So that's, you know, it's roughly about 20 minutes all up, and the movements, the music moves into each other throughout the piece.
Oh, okay. So there's no "should we clap here"?
No, that's right. It's just
Okay.
it's just completely continuous, and so I've kind of sewn up those elements in a bid to kind of give that a different experience.
Oh, okay. Is it thematically linked? Are we sort of working with the same material all the way through?
Yes. Some of the material that we hear in the prelude, we then hear in a very condensed and very pulsating form in the second movement. Here it is, a set of variations in the third, and then it's kind of converted into lots of little scales in the scherzo at the end.
So your motivic cellar idea, did you go through a few drafts of that, or did it sort of alight on your shoulder as though a dove from heaven, or did you just whack it down and go, "Oh, that's a good bit. I'll use that one. That's good."
I just laughed because of recognising the whack it down and that sounds good bit. No, it actually came out of I'd written the third movement first. I'd written the variations first, thinking that will be a cell, kind of quite a decent, maybe just a middle slow movement, and it ended up being a third rather than a second movement. And then I then took the opening theme of the variations and used that in the prelude, and then realised I could then manipulate that further still in the fast movement. So it comes out of trying to find a cell or a motif which somehow expresses something essential, and then continuing to work with that material and expand it and to really stretch it. And this is wonderful things about music, is that it's so infinitely plastic. Is you can start with something quite small and then stretch it enormously and work with it kind of like the material of a sculptor.
So we've got this sort of weight of cultural reference about the actual structure of a string quartet, the way that you've done the movements and so on. Were there more specific references within the work to old world European things?
Yes, I think there are. There are, in some senses, the whole idea of writing for the Pavel Haas quartet was a bit of an initial idea, in that I was going to write a piece which was in some ways a tribute to Pavel Haas, the Czech composer who met a very tragic and horrible death in the Nazi concentration camps in World War II. But instead of writing what would inevitably be a rather sombre piece, I decided to instead focus on the idea of the Australian experience of this. We didn't experience in Australia a tyranny like they did in Europe in the middle of the century, but instead many people fled the horrors of Europe and started a new life in Australia, and that is the Australian experience of having that background in Europe, of all that great appreciation for culture and ideas and the weight, and then transplanting that into a new context. And so much of the piece is about the idea of old Europe, and then finding a new context and a new world for much of this energy and these ideas to take place. And I was also mindful of the whole fact that Richard Goldner was one of the important people who started Musica Viva, and so we've come full circle there with Musica Viva now bringing out the Pavel Haas quartet. And there are some titles which reflect this whole interest in the old world and its transplant into the new world. So, for example, the second movement is called Flight, and instead of that being about soaring over landscape or anything, which you might think of it like that, it is instead this idea of escape and fleeing from danger. And so the music is very insistent and urgent and moves on at this kind of great and almost dangerous pace. The slow movement, which is called dirge. Dirge is simply a song or a piece of music which is related to a funeral. And that is my little tribute to Pavel Haas in this quartet.
Yeah, oh, I think that's lovely. You've obviously had to think a lot about chamber music this year because you're Musica Viva's featured composer for the year. And you've talked about referencing traditional things about string quartets.
Yeah.
That's nice. Were there particular things about writing for chamber groups where you've basically got one line to a part as opposed to writing for solo keyboard or writing for a whacking big orchestra that challenged you? Were there things you were trying to avoid doing?
Look, I try to avoid composing most days. Yeah, look, chamber music is music in the raw in some ways, in that you can't hide behind a big percussion section or lots of textural music, which is one of the fun things about writing for orchestra. You can't hide behind expressing a text like you can in vocal or choral music. It's all about the substance, and it's all about simply note against note and sound through time. So it's music in its most intimate and in some ways most challenging for a composer.
What do you like best about the structure that you've got ahead of you for this year of lots of different sorts of chamber music?
Yeah, look, it's this is a fantastic opportunity for me being featured composer. There's really no better gig in the country as far as I'm concerned, having wonderful performance opportunities. So I can just speak about what I'm up to at the moment. I'm just still composing a piece for violin and piano for Alina Ibragimova and Cedric Tabergian, and that's kind of next on the agenda. And then once that is finished, then the nice stuff begins, and I get to do some travelling and hearing the music and working with performers and putting the whole thing together, which is kind of the final point of composition. Really, is the realising from the stage of dots on the page and to making the experience a live one.
Do you remember the first time you went to a chamber music concert?
Yes, I think it would have been a Musica Viva in schools experience.
Yeah, that's what I thought too when I was thinking about that.
Yeah, and it would have been groups. I mean, it would have been the Australian Chamber Orchestra and other groups such as the Magpie Musicians, I think, and other groups like that who came around to schools. So, indeed, that first live experience of hearing musicians, is thanks to Musica Viva.
And here you are now.
And here I am now.
Yeah, that's great, Paul. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Catherine.